My name is Leah Gage, and I'm the Program Officer at VegFund, and I'm so excited to moderate today's webinar, Advanced Communication Skills for Vegan Activists. Before I introduce our speaker and introduce today's presentation, I wanted to give you all a little bit of background as to who we are at VegFund and what it is we do. I noticed in our registration that several of you, in fact over half, said that you've never received a grant from VegFund before. And what better audience to receive a grant from VegFund than a group of vegan activists who are here wanting to learn communication skills. So please, when you have some time, take a moment to check out vegfund.org. We're a nonprofit organization that has been in existence for almost 10 years, and we provide grants to thousands of activists all over the world. We support community outreach projects like food sampling, film screenings, documentary screenings, pay-per-view street outreach, people hosting vegan fairs and veg fests. We have two relatively new grant categories that we introduced just last year, learning events and tools, which is really geared toward things like today's presentation, webinars, training materials, panels and conferences, as well as general innovative outreach. So things that maybe don't fit into those other categories like restaurant weeks, pledges and vegan challenges. We also fund online activism. So please take a moment when you can to look at vegfund.org and see if any of the activities that you are already carrying out might be eligible for VegFund funding. In addition to today's webinar, we have one next month that we encourage you to attend, Turning Viztopia into Powerful Action for Change with Viztopia author Claire Mann. You can find the registration link for that webinar and recordings of all of our past webinars on our website as well. We have tons of resources. This last year, we launched a brand new website, and one of our major goals is to really not only provide grant funding to vegan activists, but we want to help support your activism in other ways by giving you tools, by giving you resources and knowledge that can really help take your activism to the next level. So please take a moment when you can and visit vegfund.org. But today we are excited to have Alex Bez with us. He is, let me just check this message real quick. Before we introduce Alex, I just want to mention we're going to take questions at the end of the webinar. So please hold your questions until the end. You can always send us chats. If you look in the GoToWebinar dashboard, you can send chats and questions to any of the organizers of this webinar, and we'll be able to take those and hold them until the end for Alex to answer. Today's presentation will last about 1.5 hours. It is being recorded, and we will share the recording with you once the presentation is over. And you may share this with anybody in your network, and it will also be available on our website. We'd like to ask you all to please, at the end of this webinar, just take a few minutes to fill out a very, very brief survey. One of the best ways we know how well we're doing is by asking you directly, did this webinar provide the information you hoped it would? Is there more information you'd like about certain items? Are there other topics you'd like us to cover? So at the end of the webinar, there will be just a brief survey. I can see my colleague Fabiola has pasted this into the chat function. So take a moment, you can go to the site now and then save it, leave it open, and then you can fill it out when the webinar is done. But so now I will do what I said I would, which is introduce Alex Bez. Alex has spent the past 10 years of his life training and coaching hundreds of salespeople. Today, he is channeling that expertise into supporting animal rights by creating a high-impact learning opportunity via webinars and workshops all around the world under the name Amazing Vegan Outreach. Alex also speaks regularly at VegFest, animal rights conferences, and helps others develop their own vegan outreach skills. Today's presentation, Advanced Communication Skills for Vegan Activists, is geared specifically for that audience. And we're grateful for his contribution today. So Alex, without further ado, I'm turning over presenting to you, and thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Leah. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm just going to launch my webcam so that people can see me. Hello,
Looks
everyone.
great.
You can see me? Perfect. And I'm going to go play here. All right. So thank you, Leah, for the introduction. Thank you, VegFund, for hosting this webinar. Thank you to everyone who is signed in right now, who's attending, and to everyone who's watching after the fact. So yes, my name is Alex. I'm the founder of AVO, Amazing Vegan Outreach. And the webinar that we're going to see today, all of the content comes from an adaptation of the trainings that I used to give as a corporate sales director. So this framework is really a communication framework, and there's a lot that's going to be shared in this webinar. So if you don't already have a pen and paper, I would suggest it. All of the slides I can make available after to everyone who's attended and registered. But there's probably going to be some things that aren't on the slides. So if you don't have that, now would be a good time to go get one. So what I'm going to talk about in this over the next about 45 minutes to an hour is a process, and I want to draw a distinction between process and content when we're speaking with others about veganism, I guess specifically. And the difference between process and content is that I think a lot of us focus, and a lot of us are probably already experts in content. We have so much knowledge. We've watched so many documentaries. We've read books, maybe. It just being vegan, being an activist, you get so much information. I'm not going to share any content with you guys. What I'm going to share with you is a process that is highly effective at generating behavior change in others. And it's a coaching process. So what often happens in outreach conversations when we're not consciously choosing a specific process is that we fall into a debating structure. And the challenge with debating people is that what studies have shown is that people often leave debates actually more convinced of the position they came in with than the position that we're trying to convince them of, which is veganism. So when we choose a different framework where it actually allows people to be more open, less defensive, explore the topic themselves, really, really powerful. And this comes from a career in sales for about 19 years. I used a very similar process, and I'm going to share that with you guys. So there's this quote that I use all the time. I'm sorry if you've heard it too much, but it's really important. So people are usually more convinced by ideas they discover themselves than by those found out by others. Simple way to remember that is people believe what they say, not what they hear. And that is what this framework is all about. It's about trying to get people to say the things that otherwise we would be saying to them. So trying to avoid the preachiness that we get labeled with, and instead creating really interesting and engaging dialogues with other people that allows them to explore this topic. This is the framework. It's kind of 5 main steps in this communication framework: opening, investigating, then presenting, confirming, and positioning. So kind of building longer term relationships with people. In building this presentation for today, this is not the way I normally do it when I do workshops, but I think that I don't know why, it just made sense to me. I'm actually going to suggest, well, I'm going to do it. We're going to go backwards through this process. And the reason why I'm choosing to go backwards through it is there's a few reasons why. So the first reason is that I think when you go backwards through it, we're actually going from the easiest steps through to the most difficult ones. So we're going to start easy and then kind of build up that way. I also think, I wouldn't say that any step is not important, but I think we're going to go from important to most important. So as you go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I think you're going to hopefully feel and recognize why each step is more important than the other one. And I think that it also takes the least amount of time to master or to feel very comfortable doing step 5 and then 4, and it just becomes more and more time consuming to practice and become better at those steps. So we'll save the most time consuming ones for the end of the presentation. So let's just jump right into it. Positioning. So that's the last step of any sales interaction, and it's the last step of any vegan outreach interaction. And what positioning is meant to do is to build long-term relationships. So in this case, I'm suggesting that this isn't us. So we aren't the vegan taking the selfie with the new vegan. We're usually, often we're not around, unfortunately, to see the fruits of our labor. We don't see how this person leaves, or what happens when this person leaves the conversation with us. You know, I'm assuming that we're at an outreach event. It could even be a friend or a colleague. Of course, if it's a friend, family member, or colleague, we're going to be more involved in this. But for the majority of time, the majority of people who do outreach, it's a brief interaction. It can be anywhere between 5 minutes. Sometimes it can go to half an hour. Sometimes it can really stretch out longer. But it's a short, relatively short interaction. So what I'm suggesting is that we aren't actually a part of this process. We're not a part of their long-term relationship with other vegans or with veganism itself. They're just starting to explore it and discover it. But we do have tools at our disposal when we're outreaching that I think we should use, and we should use effectively for this step. And there's a few things that I'm going to suggest here that we do to make sure that people are able to build effective long-term relationships with veganism, to explore it longer, and with other vegans. So one of them is outreach cards or any sort of outreach materials. So when we're speaking with people, and it's a good idea to also keep outreach cards on us in our wallets or our purses or whatever, so that when you're speaking with someone, you have a card with resources that you can hand someone at the end of that conversation, so they're not lost. They actually have something they can follow up with. Challenge 22 or Veganuary, or there's lots of different ones that I've heard around the world in different countries. These are fantastic, fantastic long-term relationship builders, because it gives people access to coaches. It gives people access to a community that can support them in their discovery of veganism. So I would highly suggest suggesting those to people. Documentaries, of course. Reference some of your favorite documentaries, and hopefully they're on that card. And if not, if you think of a documentary that's relevant to this person because of the conversation you had, have a pen, have a pen handy and just jot it down on the card, kind of personalize that card for them. Websites, of course, there's lots of useful websites that you can recommend. Again, tailor your recommendation for websites based on the conversation. Books, if you've read some good books, if you find out that they like reading, have some books on hand as well that you can recommend. And Facebook groups. So there may be, especially if there are any groups that are in your geographic region where they can start getting to know some vegans, and hopefully they're supportive vegan groups, and you don't see a lot of drama and infighting within the group. That would be nice. But yeah, Facebook groups where people can ask questions, get to know people, maybe activism groups as well. I know that's where I met most of my close friends now. Vegans and activists was through activism. So any groups you think would be useful, these are things that you can use to build long-term relationships. And I don't, people ask me this often, I don't almost ever give out my personal social media contact or contact information. I just don't have the time or the bandwidth to help that many people. So what I think, what I focus on, and I would suggest that the people on this webinar focus on, is going out there and having those kind of breaking the ice with people, breaking the ice, the vegan ice for people, and helping introduce them to it, and then giving them the resources that they need to move forward with that. The second last step before we start building that relationship is confirming, and it's also known as gaining agreement. So imagine after we've had a really productive conversation, it's been, people have really opened up to you, they've shared how they feel about animals and animal suffering and animal exploitation, and they feel horrible about it. Of course, you've gone back and forth over some objections they might have or whatever that is. But at the end of that conversation, what I find, and this applies to salespeople and it applies to outreachers as well, we are often scared to ask people, if they're actually going to go vegan, or if they're actually going to take that challenge. And I want us to focus on two things. One is don't be afraid to ask someone, a very direct question. Ask a direct question. Don't be afraid. The worst thing that can happen, right? If you ask someone, hey, you know what, it sounds like this really resonates with you, you know, it sounds like you really feel for the animals. Would you go vegan? Or, you know, would you go home and watch this documentary that we talked about? Or would you go home and would you sign up for that challenge? Can you see yourself doing that? And ask people straight up. And it's not for us, right? In this scenario, we don't get anything. Well, we don't officially get anything. We don't get paid if someone, you know, decides to watch a documentary. Of course, it feels good, and we are, you know, we feel like we're helping animals, which is great. But at the end of the day, gaining that agreement is much for that other person than it is for ourselves. So I want us to, when we're thinking of a coaching framework, when we're thinking about being a coach, we want to inspire. To me, that's the most important thing about these outreach conversations, is actually inspiring behavior change. And it can be small. It can just be that they're going to go home and watch a documentary, or they're going to go and sign up for a challenge. I mean, that's pretty great. But we have to ask people and challenge them to go and do that. So that's the second last step. The presenting step. This is the step that a lot of us already do a lot of. And presenting is what comes natural to us, I think. Presenting is what comes most easy to us, because I think a lot of us think that if we get, you know, the information that's here into somebody else's brain, then they're going to, you know, accept that information and say, oh, shucks, I've been living wrong, I'm going to go vegan. And it doesn't always work that way. But I do want to highlight that in the presentation stage, this is the stage that comes after the investigation stage. And we're going to spend a little bit more time on that investigation stage. But recognize that when we go to present, it really, 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 really helps if we have information from the other person that allows us to apply judgment and offer solutions. And when I say apply judgment, I don't mean ethically judge the person for what they've said. What I mean is analyze what information has been given to you in the investigation stage, and then offer solutions, offer, you know, vegan solutions that align with what they've told you. And when you do that, you avoid, or you somewhat avoid the risk of coming across as preachy, annoying, where people don't want to talk to you anymore, where people disengage from the conversation. So let me share something here with you guys. This is what the presentation stage is centered around, and I think we already know this. Most of us know that the majority of people, the majority of non-vegans, already hold vegan values, right? We've heard this. I've heard this so many times, and all that we have to do is help people align their actions with their values. And in this case, the word attributes, I use it kind of synonymously here. I'll explain a little bit more about what attributes are in a second. But we know this, you know, whenever I ask people this question, they're like, yeah, that's exactly what we have to do. But in order to do that, we have to help people clearly see that the vegan values that they already hold, which hint, that's what comes in the investigation stage. We're trying to pull out those values. But the values that they already hold align with these attributes of veganism. So here's an example that I've used in past webinars. And by the way, just a quick little side note here, I'm kind of going through all the 5 different steps in this webinar right here to give you guys an idea of what this framework looks like. Past webinars that we've had have focused in kind of on each individual step, and there's some other webinars coming up that will focus on individual steps, so we'll go way deeper. So if you if you feel that there's any information missing, of course, ask in the question and answer period, but you can also check out the webinars later on, and I'll tell you guys where to find those in the future. At the end of the presentation. So here's my example. My example is a car. So imagine a family goes into a dealership to buy a car, and they have certain things that they care about when considering what car to purchase, right? So imagine it's a family with 2 young children, a middle-class family. So they might care about a few things. They might care about safety. They might care about cost of ownership. They might care about, maybe they care about status. There's maybe a few other things that they might care about, but let's suppose those are the top 3 things that they care about. They want a safe car, Maybe they want a functional car as well. So these are values that they hold, right? And if they're speaking with a salesperson, if they're speaking with a good salesperson, first of all, that salesperson should take the time to investigate and find out what values are important to that person or that family. And when they find out what those values are, then they can start talking about and recommending the attributes of the specific cars. So as an example, let's take safety as the value. When the salesperson understands that safety is important for these buyers, the salesperson can then recommend, okay, well, this car here, since you mentioned that safety is really important to you, in fact, it's probably the most important thing for you, this car here has actually won awards. It's the highest ranked car when it comes to safety in its class. It has, a few features that I really like because safety is important to me as well. So it has anti-lock brakes. It has, 10 airbags all around the car. It's incredibly durable, heavy, steel construction. So if it's in an accident, it can take impact well, whatever. Those are the attributes of the car. And let's flip that and let's, switch that into veganism. What happens a lot in outreach conversations is that we often forget to focus on the values. And the values are the things that unite us with non-vegans, right? We share those things in common. What we don't share in common are the attributes that we've chosen to accept or adopt in our lives. So with those attributes, with those values, when it comes to veganism, we want to really make sure that we understand how to align the vegan attributes with, sorry, one sec, my dog just jumped in here and she wants some attention. One of the things that we want to make sure is that when we're talking about veganism, we're focusing on the values and not the attributes, or at least not until we understand what values that person holds and what attributes will align. So as an example, and I'll just throw this out there, maybe let's say you find out that someone used to work for Greenpeace. This happened to me. They dedicated their lives working for Greenpeace, and they killed the environment. So of course, now that you understand that that's a value for them, I would even explore that. I would find out, what is it about the environment that makes you, that's so important to you, or what's so important to you about the environment, about protecting our environment. And they're going to share a lot. Now we can present attributes of veganism that align to the value that they care about. Okay. The trickier part from that is finding out what those values are and identifying the values, and then once we've identified them, helping people explore what those values are. So typically, there are three main values that align to veganism, right? There's the ethics of not eating animals. There's the environmental aspect of veganism, and there's the health benefits of eating plant-based. So how do we do that? So here's another little analogy that I have for you guys. This is Rory. He is a professional golfer, and when you think about the coaching analogy, Rory's coach is there, and there's a specific reason why even pro athletes have coaches. Rory has a certain perspective on his golf shot, right? There's only one perspective you can really have, which is standing on top of the ball. His coach can, of course, see and provide feedback to Rory from a different angle, from a different perspective. He can help Rory see things that Rory can't see himself, right? And it's a perfect analogy to what we do as vegan activists, right? Whatever it is that we're doing, even if we're recording a video at a slaughterhouse and sharing footage with our friends and family, what we're trying to do is trying to give them a new perspective on, the food system, on the way that we treat animals, right? So Rory's coach in this scenario uses one of his senses. He uses sight, right, to observe what Rory's doing, and then of course he'll give him feedback through, probably through talking to him. Maybe he might actually record his swing and let Rory watch it as well. So sight is very important for this sort of coaching. What do we use as vegan coaches then? And I think that the answer is right in the question. We use questions to help other people explore their own values and their own perceptions of what's happening, right? So I'm going to share with you guys some questions and types of questions and the reason why I think they're effective and how they're effective. And again, there's a whole webinar dedicated just to this topic. So if you want to, whatever you want to dive deeper into, we can do that in the question and answer period. But there's also like a full webinar just on these individual topics. So just on the topic of questions. There are closed-ended questions. I think a lot of people are familiar with this. Closed-ended questions, open-ended questions, and there's also something called investigative questions. So let's start with closed. Some of the things that closed-ended questions, some attributes of closed-ended questions are that they give you yes or no answers. So they're they give you very little information when you ask them. They are relatively small in scope. They're very narrow. They generally, if you ask too many closed-ended questions, they restrict dialogue because you'll be the one speaking a lot and just asking those yes or no questions, and then someone's just kind of giving you the yes, no, or multiple choice. Multiple choice questions also fall into closed-ended questions. And typically what closed-ended questions are used to do in conversations is to confirm information, right? So if you go back to step 4, which was confirming, gaining agreement. If I ask someone, hey, will you go vegan? Well, they're going to give me a yes or a no type answer, right? I'll be able to gain confirmation as to whether they're going to do something or not. So it's not that we shouldn't use closed-ended questions. Closed-ended questions are useful for a lot of reasons. They're not great for investigating and for drawing out people's values. What's better for that are open-ended questions. So open-ended questions actually give you unlimited answers. It doesn't necessarily mean that the question that you ask will give you a very long answer. But the important thing about an open-ended question is that it gives you unlimited answers. Really, there's no, you're not guiding the person to a specific answer. It gives you a lot more information, or it gives you a lot of information, especially if you ask the right types of open-ended questions. You can really inspire dialogue. It's a much wider scope. The answer can be a lot wider, right? Like I said, it invites dialogue when you ask open-ended questions. And they're primarily used to understand things. So whereas closed-ended questions are used to confirm, open-ended questions are used to understand. Investigative questions, and by the way, we're going to get into the examples of these on the next slide. So investigative questions, they tend to expand on answers that are given in open-ended questions. So sometimes you'll ask an open-ended question and the person won't give you a terribly complete answer, or that there's more behind it. And so with the investigative question, it expands on that. It really asks for even more information. You get more information. It widens the scope. So it just says, listen, I want to know more about what it is that you're talking about. And it kind of insists on dialogue. And you'll see as soon as we get into the investigative questions, it challenges someone in a way to continue talking and to talk more. And it's used to understand more deeply or deeply. Here are some examples of questions. So closed-ended questions. Words that start closed-ended questions, here's a list of them. There might be other ones that I haven't thought of. But essentially, any of these words, if you form a question, starting with that word, it's going to end in a closed-ended fashion, unless you can really pull some magic out. But I'm pretty sure that these all end in, do you like the color blue? Yes or no. Open-ended questions. Who, what, when, where, how, and why. These questions will, like I said, broaden the scope. Some of these will also give you more information. And I've highlighted one of the question words, the why question. And there's a reason for that. There's 2 reasons for that. The most important thing that I believe we should be doing in outreach conversations is trying to understand the other person's why. And maybe more importantly than that is helping that other person understand their own why. And that to me is the key of this investigation stage, is understanding the whys, but helping them understand their whys without using the word why. When we use the word why, there is a psychological thing that happens where people might, and people often feel like they have to justify themselves. So if I say something like, so why do you eat meat? You know, it can create a sense of defensiveness, and it can make them feel like they have to justify their meat eating to me, some random stranger on the street. And the reason why I don't want people to feel defensive is because I want people to be able to explore this topic honestly for themselves. And so anything that I can do, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later on in the webinar as well, anything that I can do to help this person remain open, to not feel defensive, I'm going to do. And one of those things is avoiding why questions. So an example of that, for example, why is the sky blue? I can change that to, what do you think makes the sky blue? Or what do you think makes the sky appear blue? What I would suggest for outreachers who want to discover why and help people explore the why is practice substituting the word why in your daily lives. Like whenever you're talking, whenever you want to ask a why question, just try and change the format of that question using another open-ended word. And you'll find that when you develop that skill, when you're actually outreaching, it happens instinctively almost. You don't have to think about, oh, how am I going to change this question? But we really, really want to explore why, because that goes to the core of the values that people have. Investigative questions. It's really interesting. Tell me more about that. Or, yeah, it's interesting. I've never heard that before. Help me understand that a little better. And when you start giving people these invitations to speak more, right? What do you think happens? People speak more. It's beautiful. A lot of people are afraid, I think, to take too much time in a conversation. I shouldn't say everyone. There's different personality types, different social styles. But whenever you find that people are a little hesitant to share, these types of questions really show this person that you value their opinion, that you value their knowledge, that you want to learn from them as much as they might learn from you. And it sets up this conversation to be very much dynamic, two-way, a true dialogue, as opposed to two monologues, which I find happens often. It's kind of two people trying to get their point of view across, and they're kind of butting heads. So these types of questions help us understand people and invite people to share more information. And the last step, which is actually the first step, is called the opening. And the opening is all about building trust and credibility. The reason why I believe that this is the most important step, it's also the most difficult step, takes the most time to really master. The reason why I believe that is that we have, I think myself included, I'm not excluding myself, we have a lot of blind spots when it comes to our interactions with others, especially when we are dealing with sensitive topics, when we are emotional ourselves about the topic. We don't get to observe ourselves. We don't have coaches like Rory McIlroy. We don't have professional coaches watching us and guiding us and giving us feedback. So I think that there's a certain responsibility that if we want to, we can take on ourselves, and we can start acting as our own coaches. I want to talk about what, when we're in this conversation, when we're taking a coaching approach, when we're not trying to debate people, when we're not trying to shoot them down and prove to them how wrong they are, when we're genuinely trying to, get people to come to their own realizations and their own conclusions, what are we actually trying to inspire in others? And what I would suggest is that one thing that we're trying to inspire is honesty. We want them to be honest with themselves. We want them to be honest with us in this conversation. We also want people to be authentic, right? We don't want people to feel like they have to defend their position because their pride is at stake. They don't want to look silly. So that's what often leads to intellectually dishonest statements that people make. And I'm sure that we're all familiar with them, where people say things that are really silly and probably they don't really believe it. But they're when you're in a debate format, they're saying what they need to say to make sure that they're not losing this debate. The fourth thing is vulnerability. I think for people to be able to be honest and authentic, they have to be vulnerable. They have to feel comfortable being vulnerable in these conversations, which I'll tell you, this falls on us as the people initiating this conversation, as the people that are wanting to go out and speak to people about this important topic. It falls on us to make sure that they feel comfortable enough talking to a stranger or a family member, which is actually sometimes harder, but that they feel okay being vulnerable in front of us. And I want someone to be humble, and I want them to not have their ego interfere with their logical brain and with their emotional, I say brain, but with their emotions, right? So the question that I would ask then is, if we're trying to inspire those things in others, then how should we act as coaches, right? And the answers are pretty similar. I think we should conduct ourselves honestly, authentically. We should be vulnerable, and we should also be humble, And I think that these are easier said than done, especially when, we know the truth, we've been enlightened. People are saying, things to defend the abuse of animals, and it makes us upset. And so sometimes, when our egos there's an expression that goes, it's the ego in oneself that recognizes the ego in another, or something like that. And when our ego rises, when it flares up in a conversation, guess what? Their ego does as well. And you just start doing this. And again, I think that it falls on us as the initiators of this, as activists, to manage our own ego, regardless of what that other person says to us or does, whether they laugh at us, mock us, whatever. If we expect this to happen, which it will continue happening, then it's a lot easier to just accept it as, it's understandable. Humans have ego. Humans are defensive when they're presented with new information, especially when that new information, if they accept it, leads to massive changes, or at least what they perceive are massive changes, right? So just understanding where people are coming from hopefully motivates us to, at the very least, act this way when we're in those conversations. To battle the problem of perception versus reality, so kind of our perception versus what's actually being perceived, or what's being delivered, I should say, to that other person, I think it's important to use coaching tools. And one of the tools that I use, or two tools that I use a lot, are audio and video. So I used to, before I had a camera, or before I even thought about this, I used to audio record my interactions with people so I could listen back to them and just hear how I sound to somebody else when I'm in these outreach conversations. And I also have the benefit now of having a camera, wireless mics, and that sort of thing. So I can be recorded and I can watch back. If anyone's seen any of my outreach videos, I don't, I post those videos for two main reasons. Well, I create them mainly for other people so that they can see examples of how I do my best, I guess, to implement this coaching framework. But for me, the benefit is that I get to see myself. I get to see what other people see. And I'm by far my own worst critic. And I think most people are. I see so many things that I can improve, that I can do better. And becoming conscious of those things helps me hopefully improve. I'm sure I can only imagine that I'm a much better outreacher now than when I first started. When I see my first video versus now, I can see how I'm evolving based on giving myself that real feedback. So I suggest that people do that as often as you can. I want to talk about three things that we have as well at our disposal, at our disposal to help create that trust and credibility that we need with this other person. This is called the 3 V's. So it refers to visual, vocal, and verbal communication. And what I've found doing workshops for about the last year is that most activists focus on the verbal. They're most concerned with knowing what to say, knowing the right thing to say, not being stuck, not being in a moment where they don't know what to say. They're really, really concerned with the verbal, with the actual words that they're able to use. And what I want is, and that's, don't get me wrong, that's important to have product knowledge and to kind of have an idea of you know, the basics of veganism. But I also believe that we don't have to be these like super experts in veganism if we implement other tools like our visual and our vocal capabilities. So what that refers to, visual, are any communications that people can see visually. So what you guys are seeing from me right now, and the reason why I like being on camera, even though it's obviously more uncomfortable for me, but it allows you to see my facial expressions, obviously my hand gestures. If I were standing, you can see my posture. There's a lot of other things, but the visual communication is super, super powerful. And vocal, which is the intonation of my voice, the pace at which I'm speaking, the volume that I'm speaking, I'm using. So just an example with volume, for example, if you speak too quietly and the other person can't hear you, that often is a sign, or it's perceived as being insecure, or you're not confident, or you're not sure about the information that you're talking about. And, you know, when you're coaching someone, by the way, this is really important. When you're coaching someone, that person has to feel confidence from you. They have to feel like this person knows what they're talking about. It doesn't mean I'm not suggesting you should be arrogant in any way. There's this nice balance between being humble, but also being confident in what it is that you're saying. And when you ask a question, or when you deliver a fact, you know, in the presentation stage, when you present something to someone, and making sure that they feel that you're confident about that actually helps them, you know, accept that and process that. There's a professor at at UCLA. His name's Dr. Albert Mehrabian. He did some studies where he studied communication under certain contexts. I won't go into the specifics of it, but what he found in the context of his studies, and I think it applies, you know, maybe slightly differently at different percentages when we communicate with others. But anyway, what he found was that the bulk of the communication that we use to perceive comes from the visual, comes from what we're seeing. It's so powerful. And oftentimes when I'm observing people at cubes, sorry, I have 2 dogs now that are looking for attention. So sorry if I'm distracted a little bit. When we're at, let's say, a Cube of Truth or an outreach event, Earthlings experience, whatever it might be, when I'm observing people, what I notice a lot of times is, you know, people standing there, like they're not smiling. I don't see energy from them in their facial expressions, in their body posture, and people are absorbing that. That is communicating something to somebody else. That's telling someone, you're not that passionate about this. You don't really care about this that much, you know? And again, there's this fine balance that you have to find where it's not over the top. I hope I'm not over the top, but you have to find this balance where people are genuinely like interested and like motivated, and like they're like, oh, it's so interesting to talk to this person because they're communicating on all these different levels. So there's another webinar that I did specifically on this topic, building trust and credibility. You can go really, really deep into it, but I want us to at least be conscious of that, of the 3 V's. And one other topic when it comes to building trust and credibility, which is the concept of these 2 worlds coming together. You know, so I talk about this. I've talked about this before, where you know, this person with whom I'm interacting, I have this idea of, you know, my world as a vegan activist and their world as a non-vegan. And the reason why in this slide here I have their world as being so much larger is because I want to approach this whole conversation, this whole experience, from their perspective. Okay, I want I want to be in their world. You know, what I'm trying to do ultimately, if I'm successful, is I'm trying to put my vegan animal rights message, this little world, which I know I get, for me, it's my whole world, but from their perspective, it's not at all, right? From their perspective, their world includes everything that's going on in their lives, you know, their job, their family, you know, their mortgage, their car payments, their cell phone bill, whatever it is, they have all these things in their life, right? And I want us to kind of approach this from a place of, I don't know, like understanding and humility as well. Like, I'm super grateful anytime that I get to talk to somebody, that somebody's willing to talk to me about this topic, regardless of how it goes. I'm very grateful that they took the time and energy to talk to me about it. So it's very, very difficult to make me upset when, for someone to make me upset when we're having a conversation about this, because, you know, they're already challenging themselves to think about it. And again, I think that if I do a good job as a coach, I can help them progress further, and I take that onus on myself to try and get my world into theirs. I don't view it as their responsibility to just accept whatever messages are coming at them, right? So that's the way that I think about it. I'm sure that might be open for debate. Some people might not agree with me on that one, but that is the way that I perceive it. And outside of that framework, so we touched on the 5 different steps within that framework. Outside of that framework, and I say outside that just because it wasn't, I mean, it's not highlighted on the slides, but it is a part of every single conversation. It's by far, I think, the scariest, most difficult, most time-consuming, most frustrating thing for all vegan animal rights activists is this: the objections that we get to veganism. And yes, I spent a lot of time making this slide. I actually had a lot of fun making it, but I tried to kind of just put in some of the common objections that we hear when all we're trying to do, right? All we're trying to do is say, like, hey, look, we're exploiting and abusing animals and killing animals unnecessarily, and we just get bombarded with all these, you know, excuses or reasons that people, I'll never go vegan, you know, or there's no way we should be vegan. And like I mentioned before, I'm not going to focus on the content of each of these different types of objections, although we will have time, you know, maybe for one example as we go through here. And there's a webinar actually coming up on February 3rd, just focused on objection handling. So we'll go a lot deeper into this one. But what I do want to share with you right now is the process that I use, or I try to use, you know, to the best of my ability when objection handling. And it's the 7 steps for objection handling. So here we go. First step is to listen. Simple. Don't interrupt people when they are sharing the objection. Despite, you know, how silly it may sound, how much you might disagree, listen. Just listen to what they're saying, and listen with an actual intent to understand, you know, understand where they're coming from and why they might be thinking this way, right? And once you've listened to whatever it is that they have to say to their objection, acknowledge what you've heard from them, and acknowledge your interpretation of what they said as well. And that's important, because if you misunderstand what it is that they're saying and you start responding to that, you start going through the next steps, misunderstanding, it can set you off on just a painful conversation. So acknowledging back to you know what somebody said. Echoing back what somebody said, and we can talk again. I'll talk about a specific example of that when we go through the 7 steps. So maybe I'll give one example. Empathizing, showing the other person that you understand, right? So there's that need for the reality and perception. The reality is you might understand very well where they're coming from. I'd say it's arguably more important for that person to understand that you understand. You know, we're going a little meta here, but it's so important for them to understand that you understand where they're coming from, because it diffuses this potential debate or potential argument right at the beginning. And then before we even share our counter argument or our position or whatever that might be, I suggest that we try to understand more deeply. And I'll go back to what I said in the investigation stage. We're trying to understand more deeply, sure, for ourselves, but as a coach, we're almost acting as a mirror. We want them to explore this objection, this obstacle that they have more deeply, right? And the best way to do that is just by asking them good, open-ended questions. And if you have that pen and paper, this is a good time to jot down 3 different styles of questions that you can ask in this stage. And again, I'll show you an example when I go through the example. You can talk about the past when they've had a similar type of challenge and they've managed to solve that. You can talk about the present. So how are they currently solving that challenge or a similar one? Or a hypothetical future. So the hypothetical future is, well, imagine that you decided, let's suppose that you decided to go vegan, right? And then ask, how would you solve this challenge? So again, this might make more sense when I go through the example. Reiterating, once you've had this dialogue and you've asked a lot of questions and they've started to think about this and understand it, and honestly, what happens a lot in this question asking stage when you ask powerful questions is that people start answering their own objection. They start realizing that, wait a minute, maybe this objection is, or maybe this challenge that I'm throwing out here isn't actually that big of a challenge for me. Maybe I don't actually think that, or maybe I haven't thought about this enough. Anyway, there's so many different styles of objections that they can perceive this in many different ways. But the point is, when in step 5, when we reiterate, so when we summarize the important points of what was said in that dialogue, and primarily it was them answering questions, I'm gonna say back to them, hey, so what I hear you saying, or what you mentioned is this, and this, right? And it synthesizes, it keeps everything organized, again, because it can go off on tangents. So you want to pull out the most important things and say, hey, here's what I'm getting from you related to this topic. Now, this is the point where, if you notice, this is a very collaborative process, right? This isn't a competitive process. This is collaborative. We're working together to figure out this objection. At this point, I can present my contribution to the solution of this objection, okay? Step 6 out of 7, this is almost the last step. This is where I present my little bit and say, hey, have you thought about this before, in addition to the other things that you just thought of? And the 7th step is gaining agreement. So it's confirming with them that what we've talked about, what I've suggested, and what they've come up as their potential solutions for this objection makes sense, and that they're going to do it. So here's my example. Let's suppose that someone says, let's use the protein myth, right? The protein objection, protein though. So yeah, you know what, I'm against this. This is horrible, but I work out at the gym. I need protein. I can acknowledge that. Hey, so okay, so I guess what you're saying then is you're against this. Obviously, this really bothers you to see animals being treated this way, but you're concerned that if you stopped consuming those products, it would have a negative health effect on you. Is that what you're saying? Yes, that is what he's saying, right? So we're starting off with me, really acknowledging what he's saying, him being like, yeah, you do understand, and then on top of that, I'm going to empathize. Now, I can empathize 2 ways. I can empathize with my own experience, or I can empathize with other people's experiences. And I'm going to empathize in this scenario with other people's experiences because I was never terribly concerned about protein, probably because I had already learned that wasn't an issue. So I didn't have that same concern when I went vegan. But I talked to a lot of people who do. So guess what? Hey, you know what? I've actually talked to a lot of athletes and bodybuilders like yourself who are concerned about that, and it's totally normal. I think that industry, and even myself when I was growing up, I learned, right, that protein comes from animal products, right? So I'm going to empathize however I can. I'm going to help them understand that I understand this, that I've seen this before, or I've experienced this before, and then I'm going to ask questions, right? So I'm going to ask questions, something like, hey, you know what, well, based on my empathizing there, I might say something like, where was it, or when did you first learn that protein only came from animals, right? Maybe I'll get an answer there. Maybe he'll say, oh, well, you know what, I know that, you know, you can also get protein from other sources, but I don't know if I can get enough or that sort of thing, right? This is where I'll go into those past, present, or hypothetical future. So I'm still in step 4 here. I would ask a question about the past. Hey, let me ask you a question. When you first started bodybuilding, when you first started becoming conscious, let's say, of your protein intake, what steps did you take to make sure that you were getting enough protein? And he's going to describe what he did when he first started working out to figure that out, right? I might skip to, you know, and whatever his answer might be, you know, I did some research online. I looked up some bodybuilders. I found some nutrition plans and kind of like copied those, and that's what I implemented, right? Cool, that makes sense. I might ask a hypothetical future question. I'd say, well, let me ask you a question then. If this bothers you this much, right, and obviously you don't want to have a negative health effect on yourself, what would you do, or what could you do if you decided to stop consuming these animals to make sure that you're still getting enough protein to support your health goals or your fitness goals? What steps could you take? Now, he's already thought about what he did in the past, so hopefully he can figure that out, right? Hopefully he can figure out, well, I guess, and a lot of people do, like, well, I guess I could do the same thing. I could like do some research, you know, I don't know, whatever he comes up with in that scenario, right? Now, regardless of what he comes up with, what I would do is in step 5 is I'm going to reiterate that back to him and say, yeah, okay, so yeah, it makes sense. Like if you decided to do that, I guess you could do the same things, right? You could search some information online, come up with a diet plan, and that I'm going to present my solution. And I might even do that in a question. Hey, have you actually heard of? Do you follow any of like the vegan bodybuilders out there? No? Great. Well, here, let me give you some suggestions. So I can present that suggestion to him. I say, here, check these guys out. These guys went from eating meat, or some of them have never consumed meat, or, you know, here's some athletes. Just give them examples of that sort of thing. So, and now I can go to gain agreement, right? Maybe I'll give him, maybe we've also discussed the challenge, right? So let me ask you a question. You know, given that you can do the same steps, are you open to that? Would you go and would you follow these vegan bodybuilders that I wrote down? And would you maybe try the challenge now to see if you can do that and leave these products behind? You know, I'm gonna ask him a yes or no question. I'm gonna ask him a direct question to see if he's able and willing to do it. Those are the 7 objection handling steps. We're gonna go way more in depth on the next webinar, and we're gonna go through some much more specific examples. I know there's, well, Earthling Ed has a fantastic book, 30 most common objections. So that will give you a lot of product knowledge. And I think if you pair that with these steps, you'll find a lot of people being really open to discussing these topics and not resisting, not getting into debates over you know, different points. That's the framework that I use for communicating veganism and animal rights. I hope it was you know, I hope it was useful. And I want to thank you guys for taking the time to, you know, for investing time. I know that this is, you know, it's an evening. You guys might be, I don't know, there's so many options. You could be doing so many other things. So thank you guys for tuning in. I want to thank VegFund again for their support. I want to thank all of you guys for your ongoing support. The website, Avo's website is right there. And all of the social media channels, which I forgot to add all the logos. Usually they're right beside the Amazing Vegan Outreach, but you can find Avo on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram under Amazing Vegan Outreach. So thank you guys, and I hope to see you guys on some of the next webinars, on the upcoming webinars. Thank you guys.
Thanks, Alex. This is really helpful, and as you can imagine, we've gotten a lot of comments and questions. One of the first ones that came out to me that somebody asked, this is, of course, advanced communication skills, right? And so a lot of this stuff seems like a lot. And somebody commented, you know, I identify as vegan. I feel very strongly about veganism, but I don't identify as an outreach activist because it really feels scary. Can you talk to that at all? Like, this does seem scary, going out and, you know, taking this approach that you have to speaking with people and finding out their values.
Yeah, I recognize. So just so you guys know, what I've done here is basically compressed a 2-day workshop into about an hour's worth of material. So It seems scary when it's presented along 2 days, and it seems even scarier if it's presented in 1 hour. What I don't want people to do after hearing this stuff is put undue pressure on yourselves to be able to do all these things. So I hope that if you can take one thing from this, I hope that the philosophy behind what outreach should be, I hope that's what impacts you the most. The specific skills and the specific things that we talk about here, if you want to develop those more, just spend some time, go to the webinars that go much more in depth into them. They'll give you very specific questions you can ask. Find out what works for you. And the reality is this, that I think as vegans, we automatically become ambassadors for these victims, for non-human animals, right? We can't help it. It's kind of part of it comes with the territory, right? Even if you never go to an outreach event, when you go and you sit down at a table and people know you're vegan, you better believe the questions are coming and the objections are coming, right? So the way I look at it is the better equipped that I am, the better the process that I have to deal with that. And of course, pair that with good product knowledge, or I don't know what you'd call it, vegan knowledge, I guess. When you do that, when you have that, when you feel confident, then nobody can really get to you, nobody can affect you. I'm much more calm and much less stressed and frustrated with this whole idea of animal rights because of this. So I hope that helps, and it takes a lot of practice. Like, it takes years. Well, I don't want to make it sound like so, but it takes practice. So the best way to develop these skills is to learn them, practice them with other vegans and other outreachers, and practice a lot, have a lot of conversations. And it's going to suck at first. You're going to fail a lot. I fail a lot. I still fail a lot. Don't feel bad, but failure is not a bad thing. We're kind of taught not to fail, and outreach, sales is a lot of failure. So don't worry about it. That's the best advice I can give.
I really liked the point you made about recording yourself, audio recording yourself, video recording yourself, taking that opportunity to practice your pitch, practice your questions. I think that's a really great idea, and that's something that we can all use, I think. Mm-hmm. We had somebody pointed out, so a lot of times when we're doing this outreach, we're in front of horrific images. For example, the cubes of truth. Do you think somebody wrote, do you think it's creepy to be standing there smiling and having this, you talked about the visual presentation in front of these horrific images that are being shown? How do I hold myself at those events? Great question. I love that question. So I actually asked that question in my workshop. I ask a lot of trick questions in my workshop. So I hope that I am sure there are people that are on here who have been to the workshop. But that's one of the trick questions I ask. I ask, is it appropriate to laugh or to smile when you're in front of this horrible footage, And kind of people they're confused. And my answer is this. Of course, what we're seeing here is horrible. And within this conversation, we're going to get to very emotional moments. And I've seen people cry in front of a cube of truth, and I've cried with them. What's most important to me, and it comes during the first step especially, the opening, is building rapport quickly. And people are generally more attracted to happy, positive people that have good vibes and good energy. So when I'm introducing myself, when I'm starting off that conversation, the first time that person sees me and looks at me, they're going to see a positive vibe. They're going to want to talk to me. And I need to create that trust as quickly as possible with them. I need to show them, hey, I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm not here to make you feel bad. I want to have a dialogue with you. And when people feel that from you, they're much more likely to engage in the conversation. And conversations, from my experience, always go like this. They have ebbs and flows, ups and downs. You'll go from being really, really upset. They might crack a joke and then you laugh about something else and then you kind of come back to the topic. And honestly, I don't believe that people can sustain a 15, 20-minute conversation of just depressing, horrible stuff. It's just this flow to it. So I don't think it's a disservice to the animals. I think if anything, if you're more effective in showing people your positive vibes at the beginning and throughout, as often as possible, that it's going to be more effective. So, yeah. We've had a couple of questions related to the idea of doing outreach or this kind of coaching when you're with family and when you're with friends. somebody pointed out, oftentimes on social media, you know that these posts that you have will definitely go to, will be seen by your friends. And, you know, the idea of, should we be raising these outreach questions during a meal with our family? Do you have any good tips for that?
I'm laughing because there's so many elements to that scenario that make it really challenging. So I'll try to briefly address the things that are in my head. So one thing I found is group outreach is way more difficult than one-on-one outreach. So family is more difficult than friends. Friends are more difficult than strangers. So you're adding in, you know, you're at the most difficult level, I think, because egos are the highest, and that's what makes that conversation the most difficult. Pair that with being in a group scenario, right, where there's other non-vegans at the table who will, you know, gang up on you, and it happens. And then on top of that, you're also sitting down at a dinner where they're most likely eating animal products, right? Which is going to be so much more difficult for them to be like, yeah, what I'm doing is wrong. And, you know, it's just very difficult for people to get to that point. So without going too in depth, I mean, one of the things that I've chosen to do is the Liberation Pledge. And if people aren't familiar with that, you can check it out at liberationpledge.com. There's a lot of controversy or a lot of debate over whether it's effective or not. I found that it's really effective because I engage people. If a family member wants to talk about it, I will invite them to join me in a vegan meal. I'll cook them the meal, or I'll take them to a vegan restaurant. I'll pay for the meal. I don't care. But we'll be in a scenario where we're enjoying a vegan burger. So it makes it a lot easier for them. This is delicious. I'm like, I know it is. And it makes it easier for them to accept that, to have this conversation. And I will also try my best to have individual conversations. So to invite someone to say, hey, look, if you're really interested, let's go for a coffee tomorrow and we'll really talk about it, you know? It's really difficult. I could talk about this for a long time, but those are my thoughts on that. And just know that you're in for a tough situation if you engage in a family group discussion, because people will probably gang up on you.
Okay, good point. So here's a question with a specific example. So how would you apply objection handling to the view of humans being at the top of the food chain? Where there is a concern, you can handle the objection as you would have demonstrated, but how would you apply this to an egotistical view?
Yeah. I've had a little bit of a debate online regarding this topic, and sorry, not this topic specifically, but, you know, whether I believe this to be true or not, right? Whether I believe that humans are at the top of the food chain, or, you know, if I can somehow prove that we're not, and, you know, whatever. I don't want to get into the specifics of that, because in their minds, we are at the top. So, okay, cool. That's what you believe, right? You're at the top. But I would go through those 7 steps. Like, do you want me to go through those 7 steps for this specific objection right now?
Sure.
Okay, so let me go back. Let me just go back to the objection handling slide then. You guys can still see the screen, right? The slides?
Yes, we can see. Yeah.
Okay. So listen, acknowledge. So my acknowledgement to this would be, and again, normally objections come somewhere into the conversation after we've already looked at the footage, explored it. People have expressed that it bothers them. You know, 99% of people, if not more, feel bad, mad, or sad when they see that footage. So assuming that they're kind of their heart is in the right place, but their mind is like, well, yeah, but still, we're at the top of the food chain. This is kind of normal, whatever. I would acknowledge that. So the way that I might acknowledge something like that is, okay, so if I understand what you're saying then, that what you're seeing here on the screen, right, the way that animals are treated and exploited and killed really hurts you. You said earlier that this is horrible and that, you know, whatever, you disagree with us. But for some reason, you believe that, you know, that we're, I wouldn't say for some reason, I would say that, but you believe that we're at the top of the food chain. And then realistically, I would say, yeah, we basically have the power to kill anyone, you know, even human or non-human, but we have that power, right? We're very advanced. We have weapons. We can do lots of bad things, right? So I would empathize as well. You know, I would say that, you know, I grew up kind of learning, right, that we were an apex predator and that exactly what we were talking about here, that we can go out and we can basically have whatever food we want. We can kill a cow, a pig, a dog, a chicken. Sorry, well, we could kill a dog. Some people do. I guess the question that I have for you would be, given that, yes, we are able to do these things, and yes, we are able to kill any animal or any human even, what would lead us to do that? What would lead us to cause harm to someone or violence or kill someone, take their life, if we don't have to? And it's difficult for me to go into this, but I want to ask them questions that will help them explore, okay, great, yes, we're at the top, we can kill anyone, but what would make us do that if we don't have to? And maybe what often happens here is maybe we get into the thing like, well, is it necessary or not, right? And if they say, well, it is necessary for us to do, then that's almost the start of a new objection. And it can get, it can get kind of tricky, because now this is another objection that needs to be solved before we go back to this one. So I would definitely I'd go back to the top and I'd objection handle that we have to eat animals or we would die, let's say, or we wouldn't be healthy. So we would go through those objection handling steps and then come back to this. So now that we understand, like now that you, I guess, realize that we don't have to do this, let's go back to that, right? So what would make us cause all this pain and suffering if we don't have to? And you're just asking powerful questions to help them think of that. And again, my questions flow from what they say. I'd reiterate whatever they say back to them, and I'd present my solution, right? And I said, listen, what I figured out was that even though I have the power and I have the ability to kill animals or to pay people to kill animals, I couldn't understand why I would do that if I could get all the pizzas and all the burgers and all the pastas and my lasagnas and all the stuff that I love without causing all that pain. What do you think about that? Do you think that you could you see yourself eating a delicious vegan burger and sparing the life of a cow instead of choosing the meat one? And I would try to get them to see if they can make that connection. So that's how I would deal with that one on the spot.
So when you're going through this and you want to videotape yourself, as I know you have done and you can see on your YouTube channel, how do you deal with asking for permission? Do you let people know that you're videotaping when you're out in the street, speaking to somebody? Do you have to get their permission?
Most of the time, so the way that it works is most of the time I don't ask for permission up front. The videos that are on my YouTube channel where you see me like interviewing someone, of course, we've asked up front. But what usually happens is they're recorded, and then at the end, once it finishes, I ask the person, hey, listen, we were recording a video. Would you mind if I upload this to my YouTube channel or Facebook, whatever? And nobody has ever said no. Some people have hesitated a little bit and asked a couple of questions, and I tell them why. And usually I say to them, well, I really enjoy this conversation, and I think that you could inspire a lot of other people to think differently about this. And they're like, oh yeah, okay, sure. So as long as I get permission from them, then it's cool.
Okay, so yeah, we had that question, and so it sounds like as long as you get their permission to post it, you'll be okay.
Well, I should say some countries have different laws. So legally, right. In Canada, for example, and in the US as well, you don't need permission. You can record and upload anything. I do that whether it's legal or not, usually just for courtesy, right. Because I don't need to use every video. But a lot of countries you'd be fine, and other countries you do need permission. So if you're worried about your laws, you should look into your local laws.
Okay. We've had a lot of people who want to know where they can find more of your information. So you shared your website. So can you tell us more? You have webinars clearly that you've been uploading, and what all can people access, and how can they join your next presentation?
Sure. So all of the webinars are announced in three ways. So they're posted on the website that you see there, amazingveganoutreach.com. They're also posted on the Facebook page, which you can find and follow using the same name, Amazing Vegan Outreach. And when you go to the website, it should prompt you to enter your email address. And if you enter your email address, you can subscribe and get emails that will remind you of upcoming webinars as well. So those are the three ways that you can do that. And on the website, I just stated it, there's a video library as well. So you can if you click on the menu, click on video library, and you'll see conversation examples, and you'll see the past webinars. So this webinar will go up there, and all the past webinars are on that under that menu.
Okay, great. And we will make sure also when we send out the recording of this webinar to everybody who attended, as well as all those who registered and couldn't attend, we'll make sure to include all those links so that everybody has links to your info, and you can also find it on the VegFund Facebook page we've been sharing for a couple of days.
Yeah. Leah, sorry, I just forgot to mention as well that so AVO kind of does three things. There are webinars, there are in-person workshops, and there are leadership coaching sessions. So all of the services that AVO offers are available through the website. You can book leadership coaching sessions with me one-on-one. Workshops are announced there. There's a workshop coming up in Montreal, one coming up in Atlanta, and one that's probably about to be scheduled in New York City. So you can see the upcoming physical locations for the workshops, and all of that, all the services are run on something called gift economics. So I don't charge anybody for those, and all of the this is the work I do full time. It's all supported by the community, and if anybody wants to support it, you can also find the link to do that on the Amazing Vegan Outreach website. There's a support button where you can kind of donate, and like the smallest donations, like $1 a month or $2 a month, really helps. So thank you to everyone who's already supporting, and VegFund as well.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much, Alex. This has been a hugely informative session and has clearly raised even more questions and more hunger for more information. So we're grateful that you're putting this out there, and we'll definitely share your information with our community.
No problem. Please, anyone, feel free to reach out to me at any point. My job, as I see it, is to support the community. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate. Reach out to me, shoot me an email, a message on any social media network, and I'm happy to respond and help.
Excellent. Well, thanks everybody for attending today's session. Please also reach out to us with any questions. I'm going to ask my colleague Fabiola to share one more time our survey and ask you all to please fill it out for us, because it helps us so much to know the kinds of topics and information that we want to cover in the future. And just thank you all so much for being here today. And thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Okay. Take care, and we hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Ciao.